In the euphoric aftermath of gaining independence, most Arab countries experienced extreme political turbulence. Many states struggled to navigate a period that was defined by dynamic ideological pursuits, the most prominent of which was Arab nationalism. Syria, a key center of pan-Arab ideas, embodied the political instability of the period, having to contend with a belligerent new neighbor in the shape of Israel and the rise of an increasingly assertive Ba'athist party. The country went through countless changes in government until power was centralized in the hands of the military strongman al-Assad in 1970. Ever since then, the country has been ruled by his family. This video is brought to you by Fire and Maneuver, a new unique military strategy game developed by our friends over at Armchair Historian. This is an instant classic when it comes to historical gaming. You can tell that the development team over at Armchair Historian conducted extensive historical research into creating this game, but what I really like about it is to the Steam page link that's in the bio. Seen as a stronghold of Arab nationalist thought, the French found Syria to be a very difficult place to subjugate. In mid-1941, the British had retaken Syria and Lebanon from the Nazi-allied Vichy France. Intense efforts from nationalists in the immediate aftermath of World War II secured Syrian independence in 1946. However, Syrians would find out that French colonialism was just one of the many challenges that obstructed their nation-building mission. Established as a democracy with nationalist Shukri al-Quwatli as president, the Syrian political scene would remain fragile and chaotic all the way until the 1970s. In addition, straight after its independence, war became a thorn in its side. In 1948, the State of Israel was established, infuriating the Arab and Muslim world. With its status as the unofficial home of Arab nationalism, Syria felt compelled to join its fellow Arab states in its offensive against Zionist Israel. The Syrian military was inefficient and inexperienced, subsequently being routed out of northern Palestine and forced to sign an armistice with Israel in 1949. That year proved to be pivotal for modern Syrian history because before the war was even over, the country had the first of its many coups d'etats. In March, Army Chief of Staff Husni al-Zaim used political instability and military humiliation at the hands of Israel as justification for his bloodless military coup. Within the context of the Cold War rivalry, President al-Quwatli had tolerated a strong Communist Party presence within his country, and allegations of US involvement in the coup have been made in the years after the incident.
And today I'm going to make you guys some broccoli sausage spaghetti, but I'm using it's skinny, it's guilt-free.
Domino effect had begun. Before the end of the year, Adib al-Shishakli completed a trilogy of coups, when talk of unification with Hashemite Iraq had become advanced. Even though the Syrian economy would grow substantially during the 1950s, political instability would continue. In order to solidify his control, al-Shishakli violently repressed the more independent-minded groups such as the Druze. His quest to build a totalitarian regime upset the influential political and merchant classes. As a result, yet another coup took place in 1954, which had the support of a wide base across the political scene. A short period of democracy followed that was racked with tension as the prominence of leftists drew the country into the rivalry between the US and the USSR, in an episode known as the Syrian Crisis of 1957. Whilst Syria was experiencing extreme volatility, Egypt had been catapulted into a regional leadership role thanks to the modernization it experienced under a pan-Arab socialist government that had inspired the Arab world. Jamal Abdel Nasser's message of Arab unity made him wildly popular, especially in Syria. In 1958, with the political scene in disarray and public opinion calling for it, President al-Quwatli signed off on the unification of his country with Egypt, forming the United Arab Republic, which was to be led by Nasser. The euphoria from the merger soon subsided when it became obvious that Egypt would overshadow Syria. Positions of importance within Syria were filled by Egyptians. Nasser tried to deal with Syria's political instability by banning all political parties, including the increasingly popular Arab Socialist Ba'ath Party. On top of this, the UAR gave Syria's economy a socialist orientation, an unpopular move amongst the large and numerous merchant families that dominated Syrian society. As the former Syrian Minister of Propaganda put it, the smallest member of the Egyptian retinue thought that he had inherited our country. All of this frustration materialized into a coup by disgruntled Syrian officers in 1961. The UAR was broken up and Syria asserted its independence once again. Although its liberties were restored, its stability was most definitely not. The next 18 months would see a wave of coups take place. In March 1963, Ba'athist military officers launched a decisive coup that seized power. A month before, the Iraqi branch of their party had also taken power by force. Ba'athism, from the Arabic Ba'ath, meaning resurrection, was an ideology that espoused pan-Arab, anti-imperialist, and Arab socialist ideals. Their political party in Syria had been effectively split between the military committee led by Salah Jadid and Hafiz al-Assad, and the civilian faction led by its ideological founders Michel Aflaq and Salahuddin al-Bitar. Even at this time, the prospect of a federation with Egypt and Iraq was seriously explored but never came to fruition. An internal power struggle ensued within the Ba'ath party between the old guard represented by Aflaq and al-Bitar versus the radical new guard led by Jadid and al-Assad. The latter emerged victorious in the 1966 coup and subsequently hijacked the leadership of the Ba'athist party in Syria. The Ba'athist assumption of power provided the nail in the coffin for Syria's democracy, as dissent was largely banned. Out of the 4 officers who led the 1966 coup, 3 came from religious minorities, one of them being a Druze and 2 of them being Alawites. This meant that the country's Sunni majority no longer monopolized power. The new government also pursued socialist policies which would undercut the prominence of established mercantile and political families. In 1967, Syria was attacked by Israel during the Six-Day War and lost the strategically important Golan Heights, causing 100,000 people to flee as refugees. The Ba'athist governing council once again became engulfed in internal conflict between Jadid and al-Assad, the latter emerging victorious when he launched his own corrective revolution in 1970. Hafiz al-Assad mixed his strategic intelligence with unprecedented brutality to ensure he did not suffer the same fate as his predecessors. To do this, he played off of Syria's religious diversity, at the same time as promoting the idea of one Arab nation with an eternal message. Hafez used sectarian divisions to further entrench his rule. The Syrian political chambers were stacked with Sunnis to appease a potentially hostile majority, whilst his fellow Alawites were overrepresented in important positions within the armed forces. In another attempt to appeal to upper society, he liberalized some of the economy and slashed many of the reforms of the 60s. The fact that the country was being run by an Alawite proved to be a contentious issue, especially since the offshoot of Shia Islam was considered heretical by some of the country's majority Sunnis. Even though he tried to portray himself as a pious Muslim, al-Assad alienated many with the secular nature of his 1973 constitution. Islamist groups represented the biggest challenge to his authority, initiating an uprising in 1976 that was to last for 6 years. With the Muslim Brotherhood being cast into a leadership position of the Islamist uprising, Hafez al-Assad was finally able to quell the insurrection with the devastating 1982 Hamma massacre. Foreign policy-wise, al-Assad was largely preoccupied by 2 issues. Firstly, Israel. Together with Egypt, Syria declared war against its neighbor in 1973. Although it started out well for the Arabs, the war finished on a familiar note with the Israelis being in a dominant position. Later, Syria severed ties with Egypt in the aftermath of its peace treaty with Israel. The other important issue involved its other neighbour, Lebanon. With the onset of the sectarian-fueled Lebanese civil war, Syria intervened in 1976 on the side of the Maronite-dominated government. The Syrian intervention in Lebanon would go on to draw large-scale criticisms for its domination of the country. Syria would maintain its presence in Lebanon all the way until 2005, when a popular movement now known as the Cedar Revolution forced them to withdraw from the country. I hope you enjoyed this video. As usual, big thank you to my patrons for their continued support. Also, I want to give a shout out to Muhammad